Of course, we must engage with China in trade. Of course, we must engage with China in culture. We must engage with China politically. China is a major force within the major force within our region, and of course is increasingly becoming a dominant player globally. So it makes absolute sense for Australia as a trading nation to attempt to liberalise its trading arrangements with China. And I want to note and repeat the comments that were made by the Leader of the Opposition, that it was China, that it was the Labor Party, the Labor movement, that first modernised our relationships with China. And indeed, the Leader of the Opposition reflected on that, historic journey that Gough Whitlam took to the People's Republic of China to open up the relationships with Australia, preempting even the US into that area. But I also want to go back one step further. I want to go back one step further to the 1930s. When indeed it was the Labor movement within Australia that were the first to stand up for the rights of the Chinese people, that were the first to stand up and say that something needs to be done about what is happening in China, that with following the Japanese invasion, that the Chinese population was being persecuted. It wasn't Australian business. It wasn't Australian business that were out there. They were still very keen to be selling that pig iron onto Japan. It was indeed the trade union movement. So don't you lecture us on that other side and describe us as xenophobic when we raise and when the union movement raises these very, very important concerns about whether the detail of this agreement is a good one. There is a very proud tradition that I note the member opposite commenting on the MUA. Indeed, it is the MUA and the CFMEU. I know your most recent hate figures, but these are indeed unions that actually have very much in the core of their DNA protecting the rights of workers around the world. So I just think let us get that historical context right of who has actually acted as a good global citizen, who it is that is acting as a good global citizen. Now, I just want to, and we've heard many members opposite and members on our own side talk about the benefits that will come from the China Free Trade Agreement. And there is absolutely no doubt that there are significant benefits that are going to come from the China Free Trade Agreement in specific areas. Certainly. I mean, no one would possibly in their right mind claim that there are not in fact going to be substantial winners arising out of this, and I think it has been pointed out that much of the agricultural sector has a lot to gain from it. But at the end of the day, this must be you can't just have an assessment of agreement that just pulls out the winners and describes those winners any more than you can make a rational assessment on the agreement by just pulling out all of those figures of those that are going to lose. But we do have to understand that we have got ourselves a bit into a mindset here, as the Productivity Commission noted in 2010. And the Productivity Commission said this, that it was concerned that at least at some quarters there tends to be a mindset of agreements for agreement's sake, premised partly on the view that Australia must follow the trend of other countries. So, and I think this is what we have seen emerge with the current government, that they have been very, very resistant to there being any questioning of the detail of these agreements, very, very resistant to anyone that might say, well, look, this bit of this agreement doesn't look very good to us, that we are concerned by the Chapter 10 provisions, and these are the provisions about the free movement of labour, which really fundamentally, when you're dealing with a population the size of China, 1.3 billion people, that free movement of people provision for a whole range of contractual services can indeed fundamentally change the whole balance of migration and population and labour market demand in our country. So all of these things have to be subject to some detailed, rigorous analysis. And every time that an issue has been raised by the labour movement or by civil society or by the union movement, the only answer that we get is that you're being xenophobic, that you are not, you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, you're not going with free trade agreements. Free trade agreements can be good. You can have balanced free trade agreements. You can have free trade agreements that don't compromise your sovereignty. I would argue that this may not be one of those. You can have free trade agreements that are entered into with a rational analysis of what we're going to win and what we're going to lose, and make that public and let us make a determination as to whether or not this is a good thing. And the reality is today, I mean, I don't dismiss anything that has been said on the other side about some of the benefits, but none of this is quantified. It's all just let's pick out the stuff that looks good and talk about that, and not have anything that indeed causes us to reflect and to quantify the nature of this negatives and positives. And indeed, there has been a lot of the boosterism that's gone on about the agreement that I think that we need to be a little bit cautious of. Now, we hear the service sectors will boom. Now, I hope that's true. I mean, I hope that is true. But many of these sectors are only being given access to the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. They're not being given access across the entire population. The entire population, but indeed just to one, admittedly, Shanghai Free Trade Zone. Imagine that's probably something in the order of 20 million people, but it's certainly not 1.3 billion. The education sector access is unclear. Some commentators say that the benefit may be as little as being entitled to be listed on a website. Again, we need to get down to the detail. And there is much that's been talked about the benefits to our biggest exporters in the resource sector. But the reality is, and while I acknowledge that the WA mining industry will benefit from the cut in tariffs to products like alumina, but the big-ticket items that we are exporting, iron ore and LNG, already are not subject to tariffs. So it is highly misleading when the Minister chooses to say that 92% of Australia Resources exports will now enter China tariff-free. Is that an honest statistic when 74.7% already enter in duty-free without this agreement? So there has been an enormous amount of bolstering to this agreement without, I would put it, the rigorous analysis that we need to make a rational decision, to determine whether or not this is in fact going to be in our long-term benefit, and to ensure that we do keep in our own shores, within our own community, the sufficient skills for us to be able to leverage off and develop new industries. We should not be given up on manufacturing in Australia. We won't be just. We should not see ourselves just as a provider of services. We are vulnerable in that area. Already, for example, I mean, I think people are being quite deluded about this. The ability for Chinese people, very, very skillful Chinese people, to very quickly overtake us in areas of architecture and engineering. is already evident in some of the things that we are seeing in Perth, that we're seeing large Chinese firms, in fact, already doing their own detailed engineering design for civil construction projects in Western Australia. And look, I believe in globalisation. I mean, I think it is good that we have a system that enables the poorer nations of this world to lift themselves out of poverty. But I don't believe that these agreements necessarily all deliver this. I think very often what we see indeed is happening is that there is a privileged few in these that are the beneficiaries, both in our country and in our partner countries, that are really taking the lion's share of the benefit. So in much of the talk about the alleviation of poverty, I have a little bit of cynicism, because whilst I actually agree with that principle as underpinning the need for internationalists like those of us on the Labor side, underpin the need for us to be supportive of globalisation. That is not, in fact, in detail how these things are really panning out. And I just want to end with a couple of quotations from Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, when he says that, in short, globalisation, as it's been managed, is narrowing the choices facing our democracy, making it more difficult for them to undertake the tax and expenditure policies that are necessary if we are to create societies with more equality and more opportunity. We have learned the risks of unfettered market economy and how to temper capitalism so that it serves the majority of citizens, not a tiny, powerful fraction. So, too, we can temper globalisation. Indeed, we must, if we want to preserve our democracy, prevent our rampant inequality from growing worse, and to maintain our influence around the world. So my plea is, I hope this agreement works. I hope it turns out that this is a net benefit for our community. I hope it is a net benefit for the people of China, and not just a small few. But for us to know this, it is absolutely, if this has been achieved, it is absolutely essential that we put in place a rigorous mechanism for assessing the short-term, medium-term and long-term impact of this agreement, and I hope that we will do that.